When we imagine ancient Rome, we often think of gladiators in the Colosseum, emperors draped in purple, or senators debating in marble halls. But beneath the grandeur of empire, Romans lived ordinary daily lives. And like us, their day began with something simple: breakfast. The first meal of the day in ancient Rome was called ientaculum. But what exactly did Romans eat in the morning? Was it similar to our breakfast today, or entirely different? To answer that, we must explore not only food, but also Roman culture, economy, and class. Breakfast in Rome was not a lavish feast. For the average Roman, it was modest, quick, and practical. Unlike the three-course meals of modern society, Romans saw breakfast as something light to start the day. A typical morning meal consisted of bread, simple, filling, and versatile. Romans baked a wide variety of bread, from coarse loaves made of barley or millet for the poor, to finer wheat breads for the wealthy. Sometimes the bread was eaten plain, sometimes dipped in wine, olive oil, or watered-down vinegar to soften it. For those who could afford it, bread might be accompanied by cheese, olives, or dried fruits. For poorer Romans, breakfast was often little more than leftovers from the night before. A crust of bread, a few olives, maybe a handful of beans. These meals were not about luxury but survival, giving the energy needed for a day of labor in the fields, workshops, or streets. Street vendors also played a role in feeding Rome's population. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii shows food stalls where hot bread, porridge, or even simple stews could be bought cheaply. This meant that even if someone did not cook at home, they could grab a bite on the go. The wealthier Romans, however, had more choices. For them, breakfast might include fresh fruit like figs or grapes, honey to sweeten bread, and perhaps eggs. Romans loved honey. It was their main sweetener since sugar was unknown in Europe. A slice of bread drizzled with honey was not unlike a breakfast we might recognize today. Eggs, too, were common and could be boiled, fried, or even baked with herbs. For the elite, breakfast could even feature imported delicacies like dates from North Africa or spices from the East, though this was far from typical. Children, interestingly, often ate breakfast before heading to school. Ancient writers mention that schoolboys carried bread and cheese with them, sometimes supplemented with fruit or nuts. This reflects the Roman idea that breakfast was not meant to be indulgent, but nourishing and portable. Soldiers, too, had their own version of breakfast. In the camps of the Roman legions, ientaculum often consisted of bread and porridge made from grains like spelt. Soldiers might also have cheese or dried meat when supplies allowed. The army was pragmatic. Food had to be easy to transport, preserve, and prepare on campaign. One fascinating detail about Roman breakfast is how it reflected social class. While the poor often skipped breakfast entirely or ate the bare minimum, the rich could afford variety. Yet even the wealthy rarely made breakfast a centerpiece of the day. Unlike lunch, prandium, or the famous Roman dinner, cena, breakfast was intentionally light. Romans believed that overeating in the morning could make one sluggish, and so they reserved their appetite for later meals. The foods Romans ate for breakfast also reflected their empire's reach. Wheat, olives, and grapes were staples of the Mediterranean diet, but Rome's expansion allowed exotic foods to enter the city. Wealthy citizens could enjoy figs from Syria, dates from Egypt, and pepper from India. These luxuries, though, were rare at breakfast and more likely to appear in elaborate dinners. Still, their presence shows how interconnected the Roman world was, with food traveling thousands of miles to satisfy the tastes of the elite. Archaeology helps us understand Roman breakfasts in surprising ways. Excavations at Pompeii and Herculaneum, both preserved by the eruption of Vesuvius, reveal carbonized loaves of bread, jars of olives, and remnants of grains. Wall paintings and mosaics sometimes depict meals, including bread baskets and fruit. Written sources, too, shed light on daily eating habits. Writers like Pliny the Elder and Martial mention foods eaten in the morning, while Cato the Elder, in his works on agriculture, describes recipes for porridges and breads. From these clues, historians can reconstruct not just what Romans ate, but how they thought about food. Another common Roman breakfast food was pulse, a porridge made from ground grains. Simple to prepare and easy to digest, pulse was eaten by both rich and poor, though the additions varied. The poor might eat it plain or with a drizzle of vinegar, while the wealthy might mix in honey, herbs, or milk. This humble porridge was an ancestor of modern polenta or oatmeal, showing how certain simple foods transcend centuries. For drinks, Romans did not typically have coffee, tea, or hot chocolate, since those beverages would only arrive in Europe much later. Instead, breakfast was often accompanied by water or watered-down wine. Strong wine was considered too harsh for the morning, but a diluted version was seen as acceptable, even for children. Milk was consumed occasionally, though it was often turned into cheese rather than drunk fresh. Roman attitudes toward food were deeply cultural. Meals were not just about nutrition, but about identity and social order. For the elite, even a simple breakfast carried symbolic weight, showing moderation and discipline. For the poor, it reflected survival, the struggle to find enough sustenance each day. Soldiers' breakfasts reflected the empire's military might, sustaining legions that would march across continents. Children's breakfasts reflected education and family life, preparing the next generation of citizens. Interestingly, some Romans saw skipping breakfast as a virtue. Philosophers and moralists argued that eating too much in the morning was indulgent and weakened the spirit. Fasting until midday was sometimes associated with discipline and strength. Others, however, recognized that a light morning meal was essential for productivity, especially for laborers and farmers. These debates about whether to eat early or wait until later show that even in ancient Rome, people argued about the right way to start the day. When we compare Roman breakfasts to our own, we see both similarities and differences. Bread, cheese, fruit, and porridge are still common in many cultures. Honey on bread is a timeless comfort, yet the absence of coffee, bacon, or cereal reminds us that our modern traditions are shaped by foods unknown to the Romans. Breakfast in Rome was not standardized. It varied by class, region, and personal taste. But in every case, it was lighter and simpler than the great feasts of the evening. In the end, what Romans ate for breakfast tells us much about who they were. It shows us a society where class distinctions were visible even in the smallest meals. It shows us the practicality of a people who built an empire yet began their days with modest fare. It shows us the global connections of Rome, where even a morning meal could carry traces of far-off lands. And it reminds us that food is not just fuel, but culture, shaping daily life across centuries. So the next time you bite into bread, drizzle honey, or enjoy fruit in the morning, you might just be eating something that would feel familiar to a Roman over 2,000 years ago. Their world was different, but their breakfast, simple, nourishing, and ordinary, connects us across the centuries to the daily rhythms of life in ancient Rome.